Welcome everyone to this Virtual Azure Community Day, the December edition.
Yeah, because we can't talk about winter edition because in some parts of the world, it's definitely not winter season.
Exactly, but it's everywhere December. So
it's here though, like, I don't know about you, but definitely.
Exactly. Nice socks, sweatpants, we are totally ready for it, right?
Exactly. We're knitting, for when we have to go outside again. Should be warm.
Yeah,
and cozy.
Hopefully when it's warm. My name is Mark Duiker. I'm an Azure MVP. I work as a consultant for Xspirit, and I'm a big serverless fan. You might have seen me as a co-organizer of Serverless Days Amsterdam, or maybe you recently joined in on Azure Functions University, which I'm doing with Gwyneth, also one of the community members. And today I'm very happy to be a host here for Virtual Azure Community Day.
Absolutely. My name is Floor Drees, and I'm a community advocacy program manager responsible for Western Europe at Microsoft. And we're hosting this thing together.
Yeah, but it's not just the two of us, right?
It's not just the two of us. There's a lot of people behind the stage, or behind the cameras that we're looking at, and a lot of volunteers who spend their time making sure that we have wonderful sessions today, and making sure that we can actually do this here today, and also have our teas and our coffees and everything that we would need.
Exactly. All right. So people are joining this on hopefully the website, right? Azure.Community. And they can also interact with us there, right?
There's live chats on either side. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So, and if you want to interact with us further, they can reach us via Twitter, I think.
Definitely, we have a hashtag VACD. That should be easy to remember. And so, if you are joining us from your living room or your work from home office or anywhere really, share a picture with us. And we invite you in our living room, so
Exactly. Yeah, we would like to see something back. That would be nice.
That would be nice. Yeah. That'd be nice.
Okay.
I'd be curious, but I'm a curious person. How about you?
I am a very curious person, definitely. And what I'm also curious about is the challenge.
Right. Yes. So there's people that like a little bit of competition, and so we have a little competition running. And I can actually see this. There is a link there. See? It's the aka.ms/VACD-challenge. People can go there and sort of like register and start completing challenges or modules on Microsoft Learn. And there's prizes to be won, I believe.
Ooh, okay.
Did you hear about that? Or do you want me to talk about it?
Yeah.
You definitely want me to talk about
it. Yes.
All right. So you complete the modules on Microsoft Learn, and then you'll show up in some sort of leaderboard. And we'll pick 10 winners randomly, of course. Like, we have no stake in this, so there's no sense in bribing us on Twitter or anywhere. It's randomly chosen. And you'll receive a Azure care package. You do need to claim the care package though, so you have to complete the modules until December the 12th, and then December 14th we'll have listed the winners on the page that is azure.community/challenge.
Yep.
Yes, exactly. And then you share your details with us, and then we can send you your care package.
Cool. We also have a code of conduct. It's on the website, so azure.community, and then in the top right corner there's the code of conduct, so please familiar yourself with our code of conduct and follow all of the rules and be kind to one another.
Absolutely, that sounds good. And that goes for people interacting in the live chat, but also on Twitter.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, I think we should get started, shouldn't we?
I think so. I think we covered all the admin.
Yeah, the house rules.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
All right. At the last VACD, someone here in this room challenged our next speaker to dive into GitHub Actions. I wonder who that will be. I think the speaker will hint to that. It turns out that she really likes a challenge, and she's here to add another chapter to her book of Azure Automation Adventures. It's Esther Bartel, Solutions Architect at Cognition IT, and she will show you all about GitHub Actions. Esther co-founded the Citrix user group Community Women in Tech mentorship program. She's a Microsoft MVP for cloud and data center management. And she's awarded Citrix Technology Professional. Wow, sounds cool. Esther, welcome to our show.
Well, thank you for having me and for allowing me the opportunity to be the first speaker of today.
We're really happy to have you.
Awesome.
The floor is yours.
Okay, so I'll start sharing my screen and then we can have some fun. So as I was already introduced perfectly by Mark and Floor, I'm gonna dive into GitHub Actions today. Just to make up for a little bit of time, because I wanted to pack the presentation with a lot of demos, I'm just gonna skip through all the let's get to know Esther parts of this presentation. So as he already mentioned, doing community programs and mostly focused on DevOps and automation. Used to start with automating Windows and Citrix deployments, moved to cloud for the last year, and using REST APIs, JSON, and PowerShell. So today I want to focus on cloud DevOps, GitHub Actions, and Windows Virtual Desktop, because that's currently my end user computing environment that I want to automate and deploy, as you can see. And I promise to include some demos. First of all, cloud DevOps. Is there one tool to rule them all? Basically, that's the idea that I started with when I switched or dove into DevOps. But if you look at the definition of DevOps, it's mostly a set of practices. And that basically means that even though I translated it to certain tools like PowerShell scripting, using Windows Virtual Desktop for deployment and operations. And I started with my Azure DevOps adventure as well, to make sure that I fully understand and could embrace the whole DevOps culture. And as I mentioned, this demo or this presentation will mostly focus on PowerShell and Windows Virtual Desktop. But I did quickly realize, if we're talking about DevOps, we're talking about a lot of different tools for a lot of different stages in the entire DevOps process. So basically, there is not just one tool to rule them all. It's more, in my opinion, all about the journey or the adventure that you can have and the fun that the journey brings in automating and taking on some challenges. And if we're talking about challenges, I definitely have to go back to the previous edition of the Virtual Azure Community Day in July of this year, where one simple question basically started a whole new adventure for me. So the last time I already talked about Azure Automation, how I'm building custom ARM templates using the Azure PowerShell module. Diving into Azure Automation, and even tiptoeing Azure DevOps. And then there was this one question at the end of the presentation. So what about GitHub definitely Actions? Check out GitHub Actions as well and get back to you on my experiences.
Awesome. So maybe for the next Virtual Azure Community Day, we can have you back on again and you can share part 2 of the story.
Oh, that would be awesome. I would love to do that.
Yeah, that's the deal then.
All right.
It's being recorded.
It's recorded, so it's real. Yeah, yes, exactly.
Yeah. So welcome to part 2 of the Cloud DevOps adventure. So let's dive into GitHub Actions, because I love a challenge and I definitely took on this challenge. So if we're looking at GitHub Actions, it's a tool that will help you automate tasks within your software development lifecycle. And I do have to admit that I'm more an operations girl. So for me, I'm still kind of finding what tooling and what processes to use for my infrastructure as code development. But the cool part about GitHub Actions is that they are event-driven. So you can run a whole series of commands after you specify the event that will trigger the workflow. So zooming in on GitHub Actions, it all starts with that event, a specific activity that triggers a workflow. And that can be a webhook or scheduled or even a manual trigger. And the workflow itself can contain one or more jobs. And each job is a set of steps that you execute on the same runner. So that basically sets up your environment. And if we're zooming in on the steps, these can be individual actions or. And if we're zooming in on the smallest part of GitHub Actions, we're talking about actions. And you can either create your own actions or you can use those provided by the GitHub community. And the other thing that we need to know is that the workflow syntax for GitHub Actions uses YAML. So that's something that you definitely need to dive into. And of course, there's to get you started with GitHub Actions, you can put your YAML workflow files in the GitHub/workflows folder. And this means that those workflows will be automatically picked up by GitHub Automation. And I'll show you how that works in just a second. I did intend to include an entire YAML speed course in my presentation, but as I wanted to make sure that it was fully demo packed, I'm just going to skip through these slides real quick, ask you to freeze the recording for a second to really read over them, and then just assume that you finish your speed course in YAML. Because I want to focus on what the real fun is, those workflows, and how you can build your own GitHub Actions workflow. For instance, in my case, to deploy your Windows Virtual Desktop environment. First of all, I mentioned that actions can be either created by yourself or can be community actions. There's a whole GitHub marketplace that offers over 6,000 already pre-built actions. So please check it out before you start diving into creating your own actions, because for what you have in mind, there probably is already an action available. The other thing that you need to be aware of when you start with GitHub Actions is that you can use the secrets. And secrets are configured within your settings and allow you to import sensitive information in an encrypted manner in your GitHub Actions. So this makes sure that you are not exposing any secrets, security information straight in the workflows. And there is a special secret that I wanted to get your attention on, and that's the Azure credentials one. And I'll show you in a minute where to use it. But the cool part about it is that you can copy your JSON information file when you create your service principal for Azure. And use that information, use that JSON string in your secret, and that will automatically be picked up by a login Azure action. Zooming in on Windows Virtual Desktop, and I do realize that not everyone has infrastructure or end user computing background. So to make sure that you all understand Windows Virtual Desktop, I will include a little crash course on that one. So Windows Virtual Desktop mostly consists of a part that is managed by Microsoft. We usually refer to that as the control plane. And of course, there's this part that you control within your own subscriptions. And that is mostly focused on desktops and remote apps, because you want to make sure that you have your session hosts available within your environment to make sure that you can send that virtual desktop or that virtual application or remote application to your end users. So these demos today will also focus on those Windows Virtual Desktop components, the session hosts and the host pool that contains them. And if we're talking about Windows Virtual Desktop and creating a host pool, especially when it comes to those session hosts, there are two parts that you have the most influence on the configuration. The first one is your virtual machine size, which you can select any virtual machine sizing that is available within your region. But the other cool part is that you can specify the image that your session host will be based on. And this can be a standard image provided by Microsoft through the gallery, But it can also be your own custom image that you have uploaded to the shared image gallery. And this is where I'm going to focus on first in the demos. Because I discovered that Azure, even though it's just, well, it is already a public preview and will be GA pretty soon, Azure provides the Azure Image Builder service that allows you, based on a template, to build a custom image automatically and then share it or distribute it to your shared image gallery within Azure. And this allows me to have a separate process to build my custom image and then continue the automation with the WVD deployment. So let's dive into GitHub Actions and check out which community actions I'm using with my WVD deployment automation. First of all, the build Azure Virtual Machine image action. And this directly connects to Azure Image Builder. And that allows me, if we're looking at the definitions file, which usually is your action.yaml file, you can see the kinds of input that I can provide with this action. First of all, I can specify the managed identity that Azure Image Builder will use within my subscription to create the machines and the images. Next up, I can specify all the source information like OS type and the actual image that I want to use as my source. For customizations, I can specify not just an entire folder or directory that I want to put on my runner for usage, but I can also specify which customization scripts I want to run. And last but not least, I can also specify where to distribute the image to once it is created by Azure Image Builder. And the action itself gives you some output back, so you can easily know where Azure Image Builder created your image. Next up, I'm going to use the Azure Login action. And as I mentioned before, this allows me to use that specific Azure credential secret, because this is the action that will quickly log me on to Azure and build my session. So I can use additional actions for follow-up actions. So as I mentioned, it's using that credentials special secret. And I can also use a predefined action to run Azure PowerShell scripts. And this will come in handy because in the process before using GitHub Actions, I already built some PowerShell scripts that allow me to use ARM templates to deploy Windows Virtual Desktop components and settings. And last but not least, there's also a GitHub action checkout that allows you to make sure that your GitHub repository is available on your runner, and you can use that and reference to it. So I do know that that's a lot of information. So let's try to make it a bit more practical and show you how I built my first workflow YAML file for GitHub Actions to automate my image creation. And as I mentioned, or as we're looking at my workflow file, I'll quickly go over that because I do want to go to the fun part. First of all, I had to specify an event. In my case, for demo purposes, it's easiest to have a manual trigger, but you can also automate it by using a push or a pull request. Next up, I'm using the environment section to define environment variables that are configured on the runner, because this allows me to basically provide dynamic input data for my action, which ensures that I can run this action multiple times and still have the required parameters set for my runner and use that within additional scripts. I'm going to specify to run it on Windows, but that's just because that's the platform that I feel most comfortable with. And as I mentioned before, this will use the Azure Image Builder action that is predefined. Specifying my source information, my customization, and the distribution type. So let's see how this action works. First of all, I'm just going to show you that currently in this Azure subscription, I do have an image, shared image gallery. I do have an image definition, but there's no versions or no images uploaded yet. So this is where my workflow comes in place. So I already showed you some of the examples, but this is just naming it, making sure that it's manually triggered by an event, setting up the environments for my action environment, zooming in on the jobs. As I specified, it's running on a Windows runner. And the first action that I'm using is the checkout to make sure that my GitHub repository is available within or on the runner. Using Azure Logon with the special secrets. And then going for the fun part, using Azure Image Builder action to make sure that I'm using a Windows 10 multi-user session with Office base template and then adding those customizations to it. And last but not least, distributing it to my shared image gallery. And of course, I do have to specify which image definition I want it to be uploaded to within my shared image gallery. And I'm using the environment variables to make sure that I can dynamically reuse this workflow by just changing the environment variables. So if we're going to GitHub, you'll notice that in the .github/workflows folder, I now have that YAML file available. And if I go to the Actions tab within GitHub, that same YAML file is available as a workflow. And I can easily select it. And in this case, I can do a manual run of it because I specified that as the event trigger for this workflow. The workflow is started. So the job that is inside my workflow is now queued, being processed. So we can zoom in on the details of that job. And I fast forwarded it just to make sure that we're not sitting here for the entire session watching the action happening. Check out, log into Azure, and then the Azure Image Builder action kicks off. And we can kind of follow the process of how far Azure Image Builder already is by zooming in, checking for hidden types in our resource group, and seeing if it's created its own temporary resource group. Because this is where Azure Image Builder will store all the temporary virtual machines and settings that it's using to build that image. Just a quick overrun of how the Azure Image Builder process works. First of all, you create your JSON template. That template is submitted to Azure Image Builder, and then the template will be used to run your build, your VM build, or your image build. And once it has built that image, depending on the output, in our case, it will push it to the shared image gallery. Going back to my action, as you can see, it does take quite some time for Azure Image Builder to build that image. And this is me just getting nervous and double checking if everything is going as planned. So if we're now zooming in on our image definition in the shared image gallery, it's showing that it is creating an image there with a specific version. And you can even see that in that resource group, some of the resources changed and the virtual machine that it temporarily used is replaced by that image. So if everything goes right, Azure Image Builder should be finished up pretty soon or at least I should have forwarded the video to the end results. So fortunately for me, everything went successful, and I can even check out details of the different steps that were performed. So one of the things that Azure Image Builder action tells you is the name of the template. So that makes it easy to ensure that that template was created. Once again, going back to the resource group, checking hidden types, and then that template, image template is available. So you can even reuse that in follow-up calls. Scrolling down to the output that it generates, first of all, it will tell us whether or not the template was built successfully. And of course, it gives us the URI to that image that is distributed. So just double checking, because we already saw that it was creating that version. And now we can actually see that it indeed is succeeded. So that's basically my first hello Azure Image Builder world action. And I'm pretty cool that I got the result that I wanted in basically quite an easy way by using that pre-built community action. But this is just the first step, because as I mentioned at the beginning, I want to automate my WVD deployment. And specifically, I want to be able to automatically create a host pool and use that just created image for my session host within that host pool. So I also created a new workflow for the creation of a WVD host pool. Once again, using environment variables. And instead of using a pre-built action for an ARM template deployment, I wanted to have more flexibility in the actions that I'm performing. And basically, by using the option or the pre-built action for Azure PowerShell scripts, I can just reuse that script that I already created and copy that as an inline script for this action. And this script will read those environment variables to get the input automatically. It will create a template parameter object so that I can use that with my ARM template deployment. Let's just look at the action. So first of all, this is Windows Virtual Desktop, and I'm checking the host pools. There's already one, but I want to create that HP-WVD-CIG host pool. So that's what my action is going to do. Once again, it's going to be run manually. And as you can see, this is the naming of the host pool, the number of session hosts to create within that host pool, etc. So first of all, as I mentioned, I'm directing it, or I'm going to use that shared image gallery image definition. Then zooming in on the jobs, once again running it on Windows, because that's where I feel most comfortable, using the Azure login action, using the Azure PowerShell action with that inline script. And just going over the steps real quick. So once again, it's going to read the environment variables, retrieve even my sensitive information from key vault. I even specified a postfix in this case, and then I'm specifying all the input parameters for my ARM template deployment with a template parameter object. Making sure that I'm pointing to the right image definition. And because I'm not adding a version to it, it will always pick up the latest version. And my ARM template is also stored in GitHub. So I'm making sure that I'm downloading the latest version of the template from GitHub on my runner, and then I run my ARM template deployment. So that looks like a pretty good reuse of my already tested PowerShell script. So let's check out GitHub again. So as you can see, the YAML file is there, so I can easily select that workflow and use that manual trigger to once again start the workflow. So once again, it's queued, and then we can zoom in on the progress of the job. Logging into Azure environment, and then running my Azure PowerShell script. And because we cannot see the progress of that script while the action is run, I'm just double checking within Azure to make sure that the ARM template deployment is actually started. So this is just me making sure that everything is going as planned in my WVD environment and deployment. So this is the virtual machine or the session host being created. And that means that my deployment should be finished just about now, hopefully. So yes, that's good news. Once again, I have a GitHub action performed successfully. So what does this mean? So it should by now, as I can see, the deployment is completed. It should have created my WVD environment. So I should have a new host pool, check. It should contain one session host as I specified in my template, so check. And it should also have an application group created for the desktop and to make sure that users can connect to that remote desktop. And just to make sure that I can immediately test access and the content of that desktop, I'm just going to add one of my Ninja helpers and then sign it to this desktop publication. So he should be all ready, or she should be all ready for some testing. And I'm making sure that I add a friendly name to my workspace, because that will make it easier to find your right environment within the remote desktop client. Talking about the remote desktop client, that's the easiest way to connect to your remote desktop. So as you can see, I already asked my little ninja to help me out and to set up the remote desktop client. So it now has access to that virtual desktop and can start it after authentication. And as you can see, or at least as I immediately see, my customization scripts ran successfully with the Azure Image Builder process. So, and that added Notepad++ and Acrobat Reader to this image, which is not standardly provided by Microsoft. So for demo purposes, once again, checking if my customizations were actually copied to the local disk of the runner or the environment that Azure Image Builder created. So now I automatically can create an image, update an image, and use my WVD deployments to automatically have a full environment. So one of the other things that, and I'm double checking if I have enough time for this. So one of the things that this allows me to do is, as I mentioned before with the creation of the host pool, is that I can specify an image definition. And if I don't specify a version, it will always use the latest version. And this allows me to basically keep that action separate that builds my image, because I can use it to rebuild a new version of that image, and then use an ARM template deployment to add additional session hosts to my host pool. And these session hosts will be based on the latest version of the image. So they will have a newer image available. Once again, I'm using a PowerShell script for the ARM deployment to make sure that I can run that. So I'm just quickly going to run this demo video as well. So this is to show you that I already used that image builder to create a new version of my image. And it only has some slight adjustments. Going back to the host pools, making sure that you see proof that there's currently only one session host available. And in this case, I'm gonna, for demo purposes, already change the drain modes. That does not allow any new connections to this session host. And this will ensure that I can fade out or phase out my current session host with an older build image, and then introduce and activate those new session hosts that I'm gonna create within my host pool that will be based on the latest image. So once again, using Azure Logon and that inline PowerShell script, which will use basically the same mechanism. So it's reading environment variables, but in this case, I want to reuse the information of the host pool and the session host that is currently available. So I can build a more dynamic script that will have the latest details without me having to specify that. I'm even retrieving the VNet information and subnet information because those are input variables for my ARM template. Once again, creating a template parameter object, but this time I'm using all that dynamically retrieved information. And I discovered that there are different parameters that you need to specify whether you're using a gallery image or your custom image. So I'm taking that into account as well. As I mentioned previously, the ARM templates are on in my GitHub repository, so I'm downloading it to make sure that I have the latest version, and then using that with my ARM template deployment. Once again, using the latest AZ model. So this is the last workflow in my GitHub environment. And as you can see, it's once again directly available. So I can once again manually start it for demo purposes and zoom in on the action once it is in progress. Logging into Azure and then running that ARM template deployment again. So the only thing that I do miss is the direct feedback that I get with Azure DevOps. But as you can see, I know my way around Azure. I know where to look for the different tasks that I started. And I do know that I can keep track of my ARM template deployment through my resource group. So this is creating that second session host. Once again, joining it to the domain because that's required for Windows Virtual Desktop. And it's pushing some additional components like the WVD agent. So the job is finished. We can see that as well with the deployment information within Azure. And if we now go back to that host pool, it now has two session hosts. One of them has drain mode on, and the new session host is immediately available with drain mode off to accept new sessions. So asking my Ninja once again to test my virtual desktop. Authenticating. And I do have to maybe do a quick disclaimer that I did not make a lot of customizations in this new image version. So it's a new image, so I do get a new profile in this case. And as you can see, I basically mostly changed only the background image in this deployment. And just to show you that customizations folder is once again copied, you can see that it's always using the latest version from my GitHub repository, because in this case, I added the new desktop in the background. And this is the script that was performed creating the installer. That's the customization script, the PowerShell script that I ran. So basically, I figured that this was a good show of my little GitHub Actions adventure and a nice addition to my entire cloud DevOps adventures. And I wanted to make sure that I not only present my results, but make sure that for those of you who are interested in automating your WVD environments, that I kind of what I like to call create a GitHub repository with a starter kit for WVD automation. So feel free to check out the repository, because it's not only containing the workflows and the demo scripts and the scripts that I used in this demo, but it will also contain all the PowerShell scripts that I'm using with the Azure module. I will upload those and keep those up to date. But I also focused on direct REST API calls. So I included configuration files to pre-configure your Postman environment and the PowerShell scripts that I'm using for those direct API calls. And I think I made sure that I finished right in time. So there should be still time, first of all, to say thank you and to wish you a wonderful virtual Azure Community Day. And then check in if there are any questions.
Die camera?
Die camera?
Die gezamenlijk, toch?
Thank you, Esther, so much. Also a question, because I was trying to, type that URL. Could you post it in the chat later on? So
yes,
that we can
I will
share
definitely do that.
Because it went a bit too fast for me, because I was still grabbing my laptop like, oh my gosh, I need to grab this. But thank you for creating that for people. That's a huge help. Also, I really appreciated the sort of quick run through YAML. I think it could have gone a little bit slower for my co-host here.
Yes, because while I'm knitting, I'm now playing also the YAML course now, putting it on hold. So yeah, I'm definitely going to watch this.
Maybe learning too many things at the same time, Mark.
Yes,
Maybe
exactly.
you should prioritize.
I can't multitask. So.
I'll make sure that I upload the PDF of the slide deck as well, so people can just
That'd be wonderful.
Have to pause the recording to get that speed course on the YAML syntax.
Awesome, that is great. If you could share that in the chat and on Twitter as well, and we'll make sure to retweet it so that nobody is left out and everybody can get started learning this. This has been really cool. So just because obviously a lot of the questions were about the shakedown for you, because you've done this for Azure DevOps and pipelines, using pipelines and now GitHub Actions. So if you needed to do a shakedown, which one would you rather use, or maybe for which use case does either fit better?
Oh, wow. So I'm convinced that the whole DevOps experience or the whole DevOps journey is all about finding those tools that you feel most comfortable with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do not believe, as I mentioned at the beginning, that there's one tool to rule them all.
Definitely.
Love those references. I will not repeat it again. So for me, as you can see, PowerShell is still the most comfortable scripting language for me. Using a Windows environment is the most comfortable environment for me. And if I look at my Azure DevOps experience, I felt very comfortable using the GUI and only using the release pipelines. But now I'm a YAML expert. So
wow. I need to go in training with you.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent.
Maybe I'm just a Google expert and know how to document things.
Well, aren't we all?
Not
really?
sharing all secrets today. So for me, I do have a slide included that compares GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps pipelines, but I kept it hidden due to the time. The only advice I have is just try out different tools and find those tools that you feel most comfortable with to support the translation of manual tasks or manual workflow to an automated tasks and workflow.
Great. I have one more question.
Okay.
Am I allowed? Time-wise?
Yeah, sure.
So you mentioned that there is a lot of actions that already live in the marketplace on GitHub, and that you should probably check those first before writing your own. I think solid advice. Is there an action that you found and you were like, that's curious, like who would ever need that? Or the funniest or weirdest action that you came across?
I have to admit that I was very focused.
So you're so professional.
I was time pressured to deliver this challenge. So I did not check out all 6,000 and more actions.
You did
right
not?
Now.
No, that's not research. That is.
Could that be something for a next VACD?
Could that be something for a next VACD?
So let me record this and then make sure that I kind of earn my next spot on the next Azure community.
This is like a never-ending story. That's great. So to use Susanne's words, deal. Done.
Awesome.
So we have at least one talk for the next VACD. Apparently we're doing a next VACD. So there you go. You heard it here first. Thanks.
How to find curious actions in GitHub Actions Marketplace. Perfect.
I love it. I think it's a great title. Done. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Esther. I'll try